Hey, folks, welcome back to the Contrarians. Today we have another episode of our regular edition. So, typically on the Contrarians, one of us is contrarian because they pick a record from a band that's not often seen as one of their best records and they champion it as their best or their massive personal favorite. So, today we're actually going to go through one of my favorite musicians, Frank Zappa. And I'm going to hand it over to Martin. He's going to give us a brief history and he's going to tell us why he's contrarian on the Frank Zappa discography.
Yeah, thanks again, Marco. Good to see everybody again. So yeah, we're dealing with one of the mammoth catalogs of all time. I always mention this as my retirement catalog, right? It's like if you were retired and you had nothing else to do but learn about music, this would be a great catalog to take into retirement and spend weeks and weeks and weeks learning, or your desert island catalog or something like that. I'm not going to go into the massive history of Frank Zappa. Just suffice to know that he made tons and tons and tons of records in many different genres. Although, to be frank about it, I suppose there is the core catalog when he becomes Frank Zappa, like moving on from the Mothers of Invention, which is pretty consistent in terms of what kind of music it is, all the way from the beginning to the end, up into the likes of Broadway the Hard Way, I suppose, starting back with sort of overnight sensation kind of era, right? So what is it? 73 into the late 80s. I mean, we have a Frank Zappa that is a somewhat of a progressive rock band, somewhat of a jazz band. They could be kind of hard rocking. There's a lot of humor, a lot of layers, super amounts of complication of all sorts, quite a bit of orchestration. And then we have Frank, the classical guy. We have Frank, the guitar guy. We have the 60s output, the sort of, psych, not even really psych era, but there's all of that as well. But yeah, so all of this kind of middle material, and none of these records really sold all that well. He had that one kind of notorious hit with Valley Girl, right? Later on, but he had hit singles all along the way. But none of these records were all that big, but he was a big touring draw all the time. Amazing bands, lots of people on stage. One of the very few people, I mean, I could do a whole episode of my podcast, History in 5 Songs, and this idea of genius in music. Frank is the first guy that comes to mind when I actually think about that, being able, writing out music. There's the notorious story of Black Page, right? A page of music that is so full of notes that is black, right? That kind of thing. So he would put all these parts together for everybody, and he would expect everybody to be geniuses in the band. Sadly, we lost Frank to cancer. There was a lot of speculation that growing up close to like chemical waste sites and stuff all along his life, not all along his life, but along the way might have contributed to that. Obviously, he was a chain smoker as well. Famously anti-drug and anti-drinking, got in some problems along the way, definitely politically incorrect. But along the way, there are some things that skirt the world, depending on the era, of racism and misogyny, quite profane at times, a lot of political humor, a lot of backlash against evangelists and religious humor along the way. He's a famous atheist, and that kind of comes up all along the way through the lyrics. So yeah, that's Frank. Dozens of albums, if not hundreds of albums, if you put together all the live material and all the compilations and all the rarity stuff and all the Mothers of Invention at the beginning and Frank along the way. Many records. And yeah, a true musical genius. So let's not say any more about that. Let's get right into it. So my contrarian choice, as Marco explained, we pick a contrarian choice for our favorite album by a band, and we argue that maybe it's their best album, etc. My choice for favorite Frank Zappa album is You Are What You Is. There you go. Issued September 23rd, 1981. It's got a little bit of a complicated history. I mean, first off, I'm a sucker for double albums, and this is a double album. It's not a very long double album. I mean, side one of the original vinyl, 17 minutes, side two, 17 minutes, side three, 16 minutes, side four, 16 minutes. So it adds up to like 66 minutes of music. So it's not a very long double album. But yeah, and he has many other double albums as well. But I took a good hard look at these other double albums like Joe's Garage Act 2 and 3, Them or Us, Chic Your Booty, Tinseltown Rebellion, and realized that there's a long wastelands of music on there, a lot of jamming and a lot of instrumental stuff, if you could call that jamming with Frank. Somewhat it is. That I don't care for so much, and then also some musical styles that I don't care for so much. I don't like when he revives the old 60s doo-wop or rock and roll, roots of his past in the mid 60s kind of thing, and he does that a little bit throughout these records. But so yeah, this record has a little bit of a complicated history that really is neither here nor there. It's not that important about the history, but at one point he was working on doing a triple live album called Warts and All, and at the same time he was working on some studio material that he was going to coalesce into something called Crush All Boxes. So these are tracks intended for all that. Eventually, all of this got splayed across various albums, like the Shut Up and Play Your Guitar project, You Can't Do That on Stage Anymore project, Tinseltown Rebellion, which is a conventional Frank album. So all of this kind of moved into these various slots that are different from the original slots. A lot of this material was played live by that original touring band, March to July 1980. We've got like Ike Willis, Ray White, Tommy Mars on keyboards, Arthur Barrow on bass, David Logeman on drums. So the basic tracks for this album were recorded quite a bit before when it came out, because September 81, a lot of this happened in 1980. Later there were overdubs with Steve Vai, of course, famous dude who was part of Frank's situation briefly. But yeah, this actually comes out after Tinseltown Rebellion and Shut Up and Play Your Guitar. So yeah, let's get into it. I mean, why is this my favorite Frank Zappa album? I believe I did an episode of my podcast called Strictly Commercial, named after the Frank Zappa compilation called Strictly Commercial, where I talked about 5 different bands that I love their most commercial material the best. It may make me a poser, I don't care, but Frank is one of those. I love all his hit singles. I love Overnight Sensation. I love the first side of Joe's Garage. There are a lot of spots along the way where, I love those short rockers, the comedic material. And wow, does this album deliver on that? I mean, this album literally, we've got 20 songs on You Are What You Is. Here's a little show and tell. There's a neat promo photo of Frank that I had tucked into one of my records. The thing about You Are What You Is that I just love so much is it is ruthlessly his most commercial material, bar none. You can't get a more commercial Frank Zappa album. 20 songs on it. All the songs on here average out at about 3.5 minutes. There's literally one instrumental on the entire thing, theme from the third movement of Sinister Footwear. And the rest of it is super ambitious, layered, tons and tons of vocals, comedic vocals. You've got Ray White, you've got Ike Willis, Frank, just a bevy of vocalists. Moonian at Zappa is on here for the first time. Ahmet Zappa. They're showing up on Drafted again, which is a redo of the Drafted songs, the very last song on the album here. You've got Motorhead Sherwin back on some vocals, and Mark Pinsky, Tommy Mars, and lots of Frank singing on this. But But what I love about it is it just hits you song after song with good comedic, smart Frank Zappa, with a lot of politics and even more kind of religious commentary. He does not suffer fools gladly, obviously, Frank, and he writes a lot of songs about stupid men, but he also writes a lot of songs about stupid women and girls, right? So that's where you start moving into that misogynist terrain, right? So we've got the likes of Goblin Girl on here. Doreen should have been a massive hit single. What an amazing song Doreen is. Ray White singing on that. Harder Than Your Husband to Get Along With, right? That's kind of a country tune, which is really cool on here. I'm a Beautiful Guy, a little bit of the hard rock sort of sound in that. Charlie's Enormous Mouth, really cool melody on that. A lot of great melodies on here as well. Any Downers, kind of a heavy one. We've got Conehead on here, which, sends up the whole, the big Conehead skit thing on Saturday Night Live. So it was kind of a celebration of that. You Are What You is kind of like an interesting ska sort of song. And then following up, you've got Mud Club, which is like a reggae song. You've got The Meek Shall Inherit Nothing, which is one of these nice melodic sort of evangelist, Baptist church sort of sounding songs on here. There's another one that is a little bit like that. Yeah, Heavenly Bank Account. You've got Ray and Ike and Frank singing on that one. Suicide Chump, don't like so much. It's kind of like a shuffly sort of thing, little Roadhouse blues to that. Jumbo Go Away. Again, you're into maybe a little misogynist terrain in that. If Only She Would Have, little Dorsey into Drafted Again. So yeah, literally, what do we got here? 5 songs, 6 songs, 4 songs, 5 songs, just bang, bang, bang. Everything's 3 minutes, 4 minutes long, even 156 on I'm a Beautiful Guy. But I just look at all these titles, and the titles make you instantly be able to sing their songs. They're all so hooky on this record. And so, yeah, it's just hitting you track after track with amazing songs. Frank has a lot of albums that I absolutely love, but I kind of did the whole litmus test against this record, and I couldn't find anything that would sort of rival it. I mean, Chic Your Booty is really kind of cool as well. Love that album cover on that, right? So there's a lot of great songs on this. Dancing Fool, Jewish Princess are 2 of my favorite songs that he's ever done. What else is on here? Flakes is pretty cool. But yeah, I Have Been in You. So that's one of these where he's, it's a little bit too kind of old time rock and roll that he's got. Some of the later ones I brought out to show. Man from Utopia, oddly enough, my favorite things on here are a couple of the instrumentals. I really like We Are Not Alone and Tink Walks Amok on that. And there's your Joe's Garage. This is one that came close. Not at all Joe's Garage part 2 and 3 for me, except for Watermelon Easter Hay I really love. But, side 1 on this I really like, although I like Wet T-Shirt Night as well. And there's Overnight Cessation, another one that rivals for me as a really good one, because again, full of hits. Montana, Dynamo Hum, Zombie Wolf. Wow, side 2 is amazing on this. 50-50, I remember, very proggy. Dirty Love is amazing. Yeah, Camarillo Bro, this is really close for me. This is definitely going to be really close. There's my vinyl of that. Chic Your Booty. There's my vinyl of Ship Arriving Too Late. Again, there's a lot of stuff on this that is just too inaccessible. And like I say, to me, I love the accessible Frank. Call me a poser. I love all sorts of Frank, and I love the proggy Frank as well. But I mean, this record is just so shamelessly accessible. Just track after track after track. 20 songs. Can't deny it. Favorite Frank Zappa album, You Are What You Is. Tell me why I'm wrong, Marco.
Wow, that was really cool. And going into Frank Zappa's discography is obviously very ambitious. I mean, like, the Frank Zappa estate has released like 50 posthumous albums. So there's a lot of stuff to look at. But I did do the litmus test with this one too, actually. And I'm going to tell you where you're wrong. I do like the record quite a lot. I listened to it maybe about 10 times this week. I got very familiar with the tracks. Goblin Girl was one of my favorite tracks off the record. And it's funny because I was reading the lyrics to my brother and my friend as we were chatting online, and we were all laughing out loud, even though like I don't laugh out loud when I listen to the song. But you stated that there was some misogynistic stuff on there, which I think is a bit of an understatement, because I mean, like, the stuff on here is pretty offensive, especially in today's culture.
Oh yeah.
Not that it bothers me, but I mean, when you look at stuff like Suicide Chump and like Jumbo Go Away, like, it doesn't age very well sensitivity wise. But I
Yeah.
love Frank Zappa. I love the offensive stuff. Like, I love the humor. You mentioned some of the stuff that, like the doo-wop and like the country. What I love about Frank Zappa's material is it's more of almost like a parody of doo-wop or a parody of country. And I like Harder Than Your Husband a lot. But I would say that you are contrarian for a number of different reasons. I mean, in my research, objectively, you mentioned Strictly Commercial, which was actually the first Frank Zappa record I ever owned, and there's nothing on this to represent You Are What You Is on Strictly Commercial.
Interesting.
It charted at 93. Really, like, success-wise, only Apostrophe and Overnight Sensation were American Gold records. So he didn't have a lot of success that way, but he also at one point had his own label, so he was putting his own stuff out and stuff like this. But I'd probably go with the top picks, which would be stuff like Hot Rats, Overnight Sensation, Apostrophe, even the Mother stuff like Freak Out, We're Only in It for the Money. Like, I love a lot. You had mentioned like some of that stuff. Again, the doo-wop. I like Freak Out. There's some stuff on it that, yeah, like Motherly Love sounds very 60s. But then you have something like Go Cry on Somebody Else's Shoulder, which is doo-wop, but it's like a parody of doo-wop. And to me, I love that song, and like it sounds very fresh to me.
Okay.
When you look objectively at rankings lists, Best Ever Albums is one of my favorites because it's very objective. So it's a calculation of over 50,000 greatest album charts.
Wow.
And number one for Frank Zappa is Hot Rats. Number two is Freak Out. Number three is We're Only in It for the Money. Number four is Apostrophe. Like all the ones that I'm listing. Yeah. Where You Are What You Is comes in at number 20. But again, which is like most bands, like most popular bands that have been around for a long time have like 20 records. So that would almost be like at the bottom if he only put out the 20 records, right? But Frank Zappa's like listing of records on that website is like 107 records. So it came out of 20 out of 107. So that's not bad, but still pretty low compared to, even like stuff like Chunga's Revenge came in above it. Waka Jawaka came in above it. It's in some rankings lists, it's not even listed. So like Ultimate Classic Rock did a top 10 Frank Zappa records. Freak Out was number one. You Are What You Is wasn't even listed. Louder's Guide. Louder did a guide to Frank Zappa best albums. It wasn't even listed. Wow. So there's stuff like that going on. Although it is critical consensus is that it's rated not very badly. There are some reviews that I took a look at. All Music said You Are What You Is quite ambitious in scope and in general one of Zappa's most accessible later period albums. And it's a showcase for songwriting skills and acute satirical perspective with less of the smutty humor that some listeners find off-putting. I found there's a lot of smutty humor on there, but anyway. But here's a couple of interesting fan reviews that rated it pretty lowly. So one fan review said, overall, the sound is a tad bland, a tad lightweight, a tad sleazy. Listen to Hot Rats instead. Another person said, I recommend this to you only if you enjoy well-assembled rock music and varied taste and styles. I do not recommend it to you if you're easily offended by anything. Another person said, the melodies kind of blur together, giving the illusion of one song. The vocals are weak, the lyrics are the crudest, and Zappa doesn't even get one guitar solo. The vocals are lush and textured, but there is no substance or soul in them. They all seem forced and unimaginative. The riffs kind of go together and they have this quasi-reggae, overly poppy feel that doesn't really feel like Zappa at all. Overall, there isn't much that this album truly is other than a weak and otherwise bland effort from one of music's most creative talents. Rolling Stone gave the record 3.5 stars and gave stuff like We're Only in It for the Money 5 stars. Uncle Meat got 5 stars. A bunch of other albums got 4.5, 4. So Rolling Stone, 3 stars isn't that bad, but I mean, there's stuff that he did that they obviously championed much higher than it. So you're on Contrarian in a lot of ways. My own personal opinion is, I listened to this like a bunch of times this week, and I really found a lot of songs that I like you said, it is a double record. It is pretty long, and I didn't really find anything that I didn't really like on the album. But when I did the litmus test personally, I played Hot Rats about 5 times this week, And that's a record that I could probably put on every day for the rest of my life and never get sick of. I love Willie the Pimp. Again, that one's represented on Strictly Commercial. I just found, I really liked You Are What You Is, but going and listening, okay, I'm putting Spinning Hot Rats now, it just made me more excited. So that's more of a subjective feeling, I guess. I really like Overnight Sensation. It's probably my number 2. I mean, every song on that is a killer song. Camarillo Brillo, the opening track, is one of my favorite songs ever. Like, regardless of Frank Zappa songs or whatever.
So cool, yeah.
It's one of my top songs ever, and it has been for a really long time. I never get sick of that song. I'm the Slime, Dirty Love, Zombie Wolf, that whole record is almost like a greatest hits. So I do think you're contrarian. My favorite era of Zappa, and I'm going to wrap this up real quick. I love that early 70s, Ainsley Dunbar, Turtles era of Zappa, 200 Motels. There's just something magical about that for me. And when I go towards what's my favorite, I like the original Mothers, and I really like that era. That's kind of like my favorite era subjectively. So I do think you're contrarian in a number of ways. And I guess I'll throw it back to you to give me any response that you have to anything that I'd said.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. That is quite a deep and obscure list that I'm very surprised at what is coming in first. So it's almost like I'm 2 levels down from being a poser, because the second level up in showing some actual chops and fandom would be to like the classic mid 70s material. But there's a lot of older stuff in there. There's a lot of early 70s and late 60s in people's favorites. So people are liking pretty obscure Frank, even back to when the recordings weren't even that good. I mean, the recording's amazing on Overnight Sensation. Like, what a well-recorded album, right? And as I look at that, I mean, I do realize you're right. It is almost like a greatest hits, but I for sure would have thought Joe's Garage Act 1 would have made lists and been quite high. I also wanted to mention that I really love Broadway the Hard Way. That's one a lot of people forget. I just play that thing start to finish every couple of months, quite often. I've got it on one of my iPod classics. I jog to it. It's a super entertaining live album of originals. So that's a late period one. He's looking like Mr. Miami Vice on the cover of that. It's quite bizarre front cover to it. But no, for sure, absolutely, my favorite period is all of this. Essentially, Chic Your Booty right through to Man from Utopia. It is absolutely my favorite period, and I do find myself a little nonplussed, when I play Them or Us or Tinseltown Rebellion. I'm just not a big fan of those ones. But like I say, I'm a real sucker for double albums. But I think there's a lot of excitement and a lot of credit that should go to Frank for all of those firsts along the way, like being that unpeggable form of quote unquote progressive rock band. He always had that quote, jazz isn't dead, it just smells funny. He's always making fun of all these different kinds of music. You're right. He's a parody, right? He does a lot of parody of different kinds of music. One thing I've always thought about Frank, which I thought was interesting, even when he guitar solos, it's like he's a parody of a heavy metal guitarist. It's like, and the next guy that did that to my mind was Jay Mascis from Dinosaur Jr. I thought he did the same sort of thing, where he was a parody of a heavy metal stadium rock guitarist. And Frank is a little bit like that with his guitar solos. I love Frank's guitar soloing, but you could tell there's even humor in his guitar soloing, and isn't that hard to pull off. And one last verse that is really important. Frank is considered to be, one of the guys who pioneered the whole idea of concept albums, right? So he has so many things along the way that he was amazing and first at, that you have to absolutely call him a musical genius. But again, I will proclaim my poserness proudly and say, give me Strictly Commercial Frank. That's the stuff I love the most, and that's why I picked this record, which, like I say, is just ruthlessly accessible.
Well, it's interesting, like on your point about like jazz, like I wouldn't say I'm a huge jazz or like jazz fusion aficionado, but like I gush over Hot Rats. Like there's just something about it that grabs me. But the one thing I wanted to bring up, the live set list. So it gets a little confusing when you look at like live set list statistics. But what's interesting is Setlist FM, which I use a lot for our program, is it lists what are the most played songs and most played albums from certain rock acts. And what they did was they separated Mothers from Frank Zappa. So it's a little confusing, but where you're not contrarian is actually the most played solo Frank Zappa record is You Are What You Is. And the only things that came above it was the Mothers of Invention, which were listed as covers for Frank Zappa, because I guess when Mothers they had as a separate act. So it's a little confusing, but that one actually goes in your favor. But like I had said, I kind of think the standards, I mean, even VH1 did a classic albums documentary on Apostrophe and Overnight Sensation. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of cool information, a lot of documentaries. The new one that came out last year, directed by Alex Winter, is excellent. I've seen it. So if anybody's a huge Zappa fan, go check out that documentary. I think it's just called Zappa Documentary. But other than that, did you have anything else to say, or should we wrap it up?
No, I think that's it. Let's wrap it up. I mean, thanks everybody for watching this. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Support us on Patreon if you can. That would be really cool. That's something we're trying to grow, and I think Marco's got Ko-Fi set up for us as well. But yeah, dying to hear what you guys think is the best Frank Zappa album. I have a feeling it's going to be chaotic because it sounds like there's a lot of different choices from a lot of different eras. So for Marco and myself, we'll leave it there, and we'll see you next time.
That's it, dude.